Okay, hello. Today's devotion is from 1 Corinthians chapter 7, and we're looking at verses 1 through 7. And Paul is going to be addressing a series of questions regarding sexual relations between men and women. Now, before we get into that, let's review some things that we know that are truths about God's creation. God created mankind. He created them male and female. Now, you can find that in Genesis chapter 1, verse 27. There are more details given on the creation of man and woman in Genesis chapter 2, verses 18 through 24. Now, God also created marriage, and that's marriage as defined by Him, not by a civil government. We refer to God's marriage as holy matrimony. And there are more details given on God's purpose for marriage in the last book of the Old Testament, Malachi chapter 2. Jesus also has words on marriage, and his words are recorded in Mark chapter 10, verses 6 through 9. So at the beginning of the Old Testament, at the end of the Old Testament, and with the New Testament, we have commands and direction given for marriage. Now, let's see what the Corinthians wrote to Paul in verse 1. And I quote, or actually he quotes them, "It is good for a man not to have sexual relations with a woman." Well, what does God say about that? If we turn back to that second chapter of Genesis, chapter 2, and verse 18, it's recorded, "Then the Lord God said, 'It is not good that the man should be alone. I will make him a helper fit for him.'" Male and female, He created them. Now, back to Corinthians chapter 7 and verse 2. "But because of the temptation to sexual immorality, each man should have his own wife, and each woman her own husband." So he's saying that because of the temptations, it's best to marry as a safeguard against uncontrollable sexual passions. Now, intercourse in marriage is pure, and it's a bodily expression of an absolute devotion to each other. This differs from sexual intercourse outside of marriage, because there, when you boil it down, it's just nothing more than the selfish exploitation of one person to grant your own sexual desires. Now, in verses 3 and 4, he's going to address married people. Verse 3, "The husband should give to his wife her conjugal rights, and likewise the wife to her husband. For the wife does not have authority over her own body, but the husband does. Likewise, the husband does not have authority over his own body, but the wife does." Now, it seems pretty redundant there, but I think he has a purpose in writing it that way. He not only addresses the wife first, then the husband, but then he addresses the husband, then the wife. He uses both the same expressions for both sexes. And they refer to the duty and the obligation and the authority. So what he's saying here is that you both have a say in this, and you both are equal in this. This is important. Now let's go to the next verse, which talks about abstaining from sexual activity in marriage. "Do not deprive one another, except perhaps by agreement for a limited time, that you may devote yourselves to prayer, but then come back together again, so that Satan may not tempt you because of your lack of self-control." Now, he's saying if you're going to abstain, you need to follow 3 guidelines. Both of you must mutually agree upon this. It must be for a good reason, and it must be of temporary duration. Otherwise, Satan's going to find a split in between the marriage there and dwell on that. And those temptations are still out there, and one or both may be tempted to stray from that. Now, in verse 6, he says, "Now, as a concession, not a command, I say this. I wish that all were as I myself am. But each one has his own gift from God, one of a kind and one of another." So he's telling us that what he's said before, it's not a command, but it's a safeguard. And also, he mentions that God has a path for each person. Now, Jesus also addresses singleness versus marriage in Matthew chapter 19, and this is verses 10 through 12. And basically, he's answering the same question that the Corinthians asked of Paul. The disciples said to him, "If such is the case of a man with his wife, it is better not to marry." But he said to them, "Not everyone can receive this saying, but only those to whom it is given. For there are eunuchs who have been so from birth, and there are eunuchs who have been made eunuchs by men, and there are eunuchs who have made themselves eunuchs for the sake of the kingdom of heaven. Let the one who is able to receive this, receive it." So what are our takeaways here? Let's recall that this letter was written to Christians living in a sexually unrestrained society. And though it was written over 2,000 years ago, or almost 2,000 years ago, there are some strong similarities to the society we live in today. Of all our sensual impulses, the sexual instinct is the strongest and the most difficult to control. Marriage is a good gift from God, but He has also given celibacy to some. So I hope this has been not necessarily challenging, but an encouraging devotion, and that you will turn in tomorrow to find out some more that Pastor Ray is going to bring us on this topic. Thank you.